Shalom family. So today I wanted to discuss and show something that, anyone can research really. If they actually, got over their personal feelings and attachments to places, that has nothing to do with them. All right. And if they took the time to actually, do some research. The same way, I did this video and found these articles and the videos that you're about to see. You could have done this as well. But you have to admit to yourself that you wanted to be linked to these foreign places instead of your real homeland. Now you would assume that this video is directed to all the Pan-Africans out there, like Jabari, Garfield, S.A. Nate, and all the rest of them, pushing these false African heritage and all these DNA tests. That's what they claim is the only real truth, right? We're about to show you what this truth is, right? But unfortunately, and I'm very disappointed to say, it also goes to some of our indigenous family in our very own so-called aboriginal community. Who basically I just realized based on comments I get that they still believe in taking DNA tests, kids, to basically determine what tribe they come from instead of actually doing real genealogical work. All right, I know brothers out there who base their indigenous claims or they claim that they're Indian after doing a DNA test. Yeah. So they're going with that very low percentage they receive back, Native American 1.2 here, Lumbee 1.2 this, 1.2 Abenaki, and 1%, whatever it is, Mohawk, whatever. So they do their DNA test instead of doing genealogical work. They get these little percentage results, and that's what they're running with right now. All right. And again, I'm very disappointed at this. And I'm sorry you feel a certain way about this video message. I don't want you to take this personal, but it's like a total slap in my face when I realize this is actually happening within our American indigenous community. Brothers who've been watching my videos supposedly, following me for so long, see them interacting in these chats and all that, and I come to realize they're taking DNA tests to determine what tribe they come from instead of doing their real genealogy, right, with real census, real marriage, death, birth certificates, right? They're going with entertainment. All right, so let's just get started.
DNA testing can determine where in Africa our forebears were from. Among those using the test to trace their family's past, Spike Lee, Oprah Winfrey, and actor Isaiah Washington, one of the stars of Grey's Anatomy.
Brother Washington, your mitochondrial DNA is quite common among the Mende and Temne people in Sierra Leone.
Five different sets of results?
Hi.
Hello, Dr. Gravel.
Welcome to the lab. Nice to meet you.
He is a population geneticist at McGill University in Montreal.
Last time you saw your DNA, I'm guessing it was in a little tube like this.
I spit in quite a few of those,
That's right. So once you send those to the companies, they'll take your saliva, they clean it up, they will break down the cells so they can free the DNA, and then clean the DNA, break it into small pieces, and then they lay it out on one of these chips here.
So if we look at that chip, will my spit on this chip tell me that definitively I am Italian or definitively I'm from wherever?
No. There's a lot of steps that go in between, a lot of statistical interpretation and models, and whose genome your genome is being compared to. It's not 100% sure. So statistics tell us in our model what's the best situation. It is a statistical guess.
Yeah.
It's an informed guess. But it's never a 100% sure thing.
Okay. Timothy Caulfield is a health policy professor who studies the ancestry business.
It's an exciting story, right? It's about you, right? And so I get why they're doing it, but is it really what's happening? Can they really be that accurate? I think they're selling something that isn't really supported by the science.
What do you think about the messages that are being sent to consumers?
I think it's misleading. These companies are really trying to push the idea that this is scientific, right? They are using scientific language and they present it in a way that looks very sciencey and precise.
Caulfield says what people are really buying is entertainment.
I think it's recreational science. They can have a little bit of fun with this stuff. Don't take it too seriously, but know that you are just getting some information that is an approximation of how your DNA compares to other people. It's not tracing back your heritage.
Back in Montreal, Gravel agrees.
These specific percentages should not be interpreted as like definitive, like here's your percentage ancestry from this place. Like that's not that.
No. Yeah. Get this, over at Living DNA, in the fine print, the company admits some of its results are guesses.
We highlight the sources of your ancestry which are likely to be present, using our best guess of the exact source. The deeper I go, the more questions I have. And at 23andMe, their guesswork isn't apparent until we stumble upon this. Select confidence level. What? Why does it say 50%? Does that mean you're only 50% sure what you told me is right?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Is that what it means?
Yeah, I mean, or at least 50%.
That seems shocking. Only half sure?
Yeah.
Do you think that most people know that?
No. No, I would like it if they presented their uncertainties more clearly.
That's right. 50% confidence is 23andMe's default setting.
In this article, it says here, genetics, the science and business of genetic ancestry testing. All right, Deborah A. Bolnick and all these scientists, professors, all right, that contributed to this. We're gonna actually get Deborah speaking on this on a video. So I'm not gonna read the whole article, I'm gonna put this in the description as well, this link, so you can have it. Just real quick, in this article says here, another problem is that the questionable scientific assumptions are sometimes made when companies report results of a genetic ancestry test. For instance, when an allele or haplotype is most common in one population, companies often assume it to be a diagnostic of that population. This can be problematic because high genetic diversity exists within populations and gene flow occurs between populations. Very few alleles are therefore diagnostic of membership in a specific population, but companies sometimes fail to mention that an allele could have been inherited from a population in which it is less common. Consequently, many consumers do not realize that the tests are probabilistic and can reach incorrect conclusions. They're just taking estimates here. They're just guessing. Consumers often purchase these tests to learn about their race or ethnicity, but there is no clear-cut connection between an individual's DNA and his or her racial or ethnic affiliation. Again, there is no clear-cut connection between an individual's DNA and his or her racial or ethnic affiliation. Worldwide patterns of human genetic diversity are weakly correlated with racial and ethnic categories because both are partially correlated with geography. Current understandings of race and ethnicity reflect more than genetic relateness, though haven't been defined in particular socio-historical contexts. For example, European and American colonialism. In addition, social relationships and life experiences have been as important as biological ancestry in shaping individual identity and group membership. Many genetic ancestry tests also claim to tell consumers where their ancestral lineage originated. All right, again, they claim, all right, and the social group to which their ancestors belong. However, present-day patterns of residence are rarely identical to what existed in the past, and social groups have changed over time in name and composition. Databases of present-day samples may therefore provide false leads. Finally, even though there is little evidence that 4 biologically discrete groups of humans ever existed, the Ancestry by DNA test creates the appearance of genetically distinct populations by relying on ancestry informative markers, AIMs. AIMs are SNPs or other markers that show relatively large 30 to 50% frequency differences between population samples. The Ancestry by DNA test examines AIMs selected to differentiate between 4 parental populations: Africans, Europeans, East Asians, and Native Americans. However, these AIMs are not found in all peoples who would be classed together as a given parental population. The aims that characterize Africans, for example, were chosen on the basis of a sample of West Africans. Dark-skinned East Africans might be omitted from the Ames reference panel of Africans, all right? Because they exhibit different gene variants. Furthermore, some of the most informative aims involve loci that have undergone strong selection, which make it unclear whether these markers indicate shared ancestry or parallel selective pressures, such as similar environmental exposure in different geographical regions, or both. The problems described here are likely responsible for the most paradoxical results of this test. For instance, the Ancestry by DNA test suggests that most people from the Middle East, India, and the Mediterranean region of Europe have Native American ancestry. Because no archaeological, genetic, or historical evidence supports this suggestion, the test probably considers some of the markers to be diagnostic of Native American ancestry when in fact they are not. All right? So you're basing your whole indigenous, you're saying you're an Indian because you took a DNA test. All right? So again, because no archaeological, genetic, or historical evidence supports this suggestion, the test probably considers some markers to be diagnostic of Native American ancestry when in fact they are not. Thus, these tests should not be seen as determining the race or ethnicity of a test taker. Again, thus these tests should not be seen as determining the race or ethnicity of a test taker. They cannot pinpoint the place of origin or social affiliation of even one ancestor with exact certainty. Although wider sampling and technological advancements may help, many of the test problems will remain. Effects of commercialization. Although it is important for consumers to understand the limitations of genetic ancestry testing and the complex relation between DNA, race, and identity, these complexities are not always made clear. All right? Websites of many companies state that race is not genetically determined, but the tests nevertheless promote the population understanding that race is rooted in one's DNA, rather being an artifact of sampling strategies, contrasting geographical extremes, and the imposition of qualitative boundaries on human variation. Because race has such profound social, political, and economic consequences, we should be wary of allowing the concept to be redefined in a way that obscures its historical roots and disconnects it from its cultural and socio-economic context. It is unlikely the companies and the associated scientists deliberately choose to mislead consumers or misrepresent science. However, market pressures can lead to conflicts of interest. All right, they're just trying to solve business, conflicts of interest. The data may be interpreted differently when financial incentives exist. You see this? For scientists, these incentives include paid consultancies, patent rights, licensing agreements, stock options, direct stock grants, corporate board memberships, scientific advisory board memberships, media attention, lecture fees, and/or research support. Because scientific pronouncements carry immense weight in our society, claims must be carefully evaluated when scientists have a financial stake in them. Unfortunately, peer review is difficult here because most companies maintain proprietary databases. As consumers realize that they have been sold a family history that may not be accurate, you've been sold, they've helped you, you scammed yourself, all right? Public attitudes toward genetic research could change. Support for molecular and anthropological genetics might decrease, and historically disadvantaged communities might increase their distrust of the scientific establishment. These tests may also come up in medical settings. Many consumers are aware of the well-publicized association between ancestry and disease, and patients ask doctors to take their ancestry tests into consideration when making medical decisions. So now the patient is telling the doctor what to do. Doctors should be cautious when considering such results, and doctors should know better. We must weigh the risks and benefits of genetic ancestry testing, and as we do so, the scientific community must break its silence and make clear the limitations and potential dangers. They need to start telling the truth. Just as the American Society of Human Genetics recently published a series of recommendations regarding direct-to-consumer genetic tests that make health-related claims, we encourage ASHG and other professional genetic and anthropological associations to develop policy statements regarding genetic ancestry testings. All right?
If you think about young African Americans growing up thinking that the history started with slavery, I mean, how do you think that that impacts their psyche? We went through slavery, we didn't start with slavery.
To Vi Higginson, the prospect of tracing even a tiny fraction of her ancestry back to Africa was enthralling. 60 Minutes sent her DNA to African Ancestry, as well as to several other genetic genealogy companies, to see what they could tell us about Vi's maternal lineage.
I'm sitting on the edge of my seat.
Kittle's company sent Vi what they call a certificate of ancestry.
Oh my God.
It says that you share maternal genetic ancestry with people from the Mende tribe in Sierra Leone. Do you know anything about Sierra Leone or the Mende people?
No.
Nothing.
Nothing.
People have been waiting a lifetime for something like this. Now, this is just a tiny bit of information now.
But they take it as huge.
Right, because it's cracking open the door that was closed for centuries.
There's a place in Africa you could say that I'm from.
A tribe?
A tribe? I am thrilled. It puts a name, a place, a location, a people. It opens up such possibilities.
But the problem is, Sierra Leone wasn't the only answer Vi got. A company called Relative Genetics found a match to a single person in the Wobi tribe in the Ivory Coast.
Different?
Different.
Now, I got all excited about that, and this is different. Now, how could that happen?
Then a third company, Trace Genetics. Your particular sequence matches sequences reported among multiple Mendenka individuals in Senegal.
What's up with this?
And Family Tree DNA, the company that linked Vi with Marion in the first place, came up with a whole list of matches. This goes on and on.
My goodness.
So what do we know about Vi's ancestry? The DNA does indicate that she has distant relatives in the Mende tribe, but she also has relatives in all those other tribes. So no one can say for sure where Vi's maternal ancestor actually came from.
Italian, 37.7.
Ooh, 36.8.
But then we begin growing apart.
There's only 28% Eastern European on this one. And
I'm only 24% Eastern European on this one. This one actually says Poland.
Mine doesn't.
Mine does.
What?
Yeah. Look. Poland possible match.
Poland was not detected on mine. It specifically says not detected.
And it gets weirder.
Okay, this is hilarious though, because look, French and German. What?
Oh, I don't have that.
You don't have that at all?
No. We're identical twins, but you'd have to wonder with results like these. In search of answers, I traveled to New England, to Yale University, and meet up with Mark Gerstein and his international team of computational biologists. They study DNA and statistics, and they are stunned by our twin results.
I have to say that one really shocked us. I mean, we expected two identical twins to have the exact same ancestry, and they should. So the fact that they present different results for you and your sister, I find very mystifying. We thought for sure that the differences had to do with just when one person spit, there was a contaminant in the sample, or.
But then you looked at the raw data, and you're saying you checked, and there's no difference.
No difference. It's like it's shockingly similar. It's like it's scarily the same.
23andMe isn't the only company with funny twin differences.
Oh, great. Now you're Scottish and Irish. All right, I give up.
Living DNA is serving up some stumpers, too.
Yours says South Italy and mine says Tuscany. I just don't understand how you could have a Tuscany marker and I don't. I don't know.
You have to come from one region. You cannot come from Tuscany and from Sicily. It just doesn't work like that.
So if the DNA technology says we're identical twins, why are some companies giving us different ancestry breakdowns?
We spend many hours, we try to understand why they might be different, but we cannot.
I think the clean thing to say is we don't know how they did the calculations, but we strongly think that you and your sister should get the same report. End of day.
I was once 100% Irish.
I do love Guinness an awful lot. But now apparently I'm like 80%.
Your results don't stay the same over time. Often they change as the companies update their databases. The commercials don't mention that. What do you think of that?
They don't mention that, right? And it actually does evolve, which is a really telling point. It shows how imprecise it is, and it also gives you a sense of the way the science actually works.
People hear DNA and they think science, legit,
Yeah.
CSI, Law and Order, everyone going to jail or getting out of jail because of DNA.
You're exactly right. And they're leveraging that excitement, the excitement that comes from the genuine stuff from science, but also the excitement in pop culture to give it this veneer of legitimacy. And I think that's a little misleading.
For DNA kits called into question. They are the kind advertised on TV claiming to trace your ancestry. A woman says she used 2 different popular services to trace her family history and got wildly different results. Fox 32's Tia Ewing reports.
This is my mother, my father.
Jennifer Smith says flipping through family albums helps her reconnect with the past.
And I just want to learn as much as I can about my history.
She recently took that learning one step further and decided to try a DNA testing kit.
Ancestry.com, very popular. You know, they're in all of the commercials. Everybody talks about them.
Smith received the kit, followed the directions, and mailed it back.
Just like the lady on TV says, you have to spit in the tube. It's not ladylike, but that's what you do.
Then she waited the 4 to 6 weeks.
And I was shocked.
Smith's breakdown from Ancestry showed 97% European and 2% Asian.
I'm a black girl. I am not a Jewish white lady. I'm black. My parents were black.
She contacted Ancestry with questions, but says a rep told her the results are accurate.
She told me there was no way they could have made an error.
Smith decided to try again, but this time she submitted a DNA to 23andMe.
And the results were very different, but they were not a surprise to me.
The 23andMe findings showed 70% African for Smith, after Ancestry's findings showed none.
Both kits can't be right. One of them has to be wrong.
These DNA tests for ethnicity are entertainment value only. Entertainment value only. Entertainment value only. Entertainment value only.
William Gilliland is a biology professor at DePaul. He says DNA kits can be great for connecting family members and finding relatives, but the science for ethnicity testing isn't as concrete.
There's nothing that confident for ethnicity. There's no diagnostic nucleotide. You can say this person is from Europe, this person's from Africa.
So what happened in Smith's case?
The simplest explanation is that one of these test results is just wrong, and the tubes got mixed up or contaminated or something.
We reached out to both Ancestry DNA and 23andMe. Ancestry tells us it's incredibly unusual to find variations of this magnitude. The company says it's best guess that the tubes were mixed up before they were sent to their labs. 23andMe says because companies use different algorithms to make ancestry assignments, you can find differences when comparing tests from different companies.
It's exciting to make discoveries like this, but if they're not true, it's heartbreaking.
DNA tests and companies say they can pinpoint your ethnicity. Can they? By Stuart Leavenworth, May 31st, 2018. All right. And it says here, curious about their roots, consumers are spending tens of millions of dollars each year getting their DNA tested and then proclaiming they are 1/4 Irish, 22% Scandinavian, or 14% Native American. The pie charts of ethnicity make for great water cooler conversation, but what about the science? Experts say it is still in its infancy, can reinforce stereotypes, and sometimes is flat out wrong. All right, scientists say it's flat out wrong and it's in its infancy. This is from 2018, all right? Scott Woodward, a former employee of Ancestry.com who helped build the company's database of ethnic markers, said DNA services are prompting millions to ask questions about their family history. He sees that as a beneficial. but he's troubled that so many consumers see ethnic analysis as a hard science when there are well-known limitations. All right, so remember, who is this? He was the one who helped build the database for Ancestry.com. All right, he's letting you know there's well-known limitations to these tests. It is very, very hard problem, said Woodward, a Utah academic who previously was Ancestry's director of genomic discovery. All right, a director there. People like to draw hard lines with ethnicity, and they should be fluffy clouds. Again, Garfield, Jabari, S.A. Nader, all you Pan-Africans out there, all right, you like to draw hard lines with ethnicity when it comes to these tests. But in actuality, they should be fluffy clouds. But Ancestry officials acknowledge there are large data gaps that prevent making connections between people's DNA and a certain ethnic groups worldwide, all right? For years, anthropologists and other critics of commercial DNA testing have warned consumers to approach these tests with high degree of skepticism. They might be accurate, but it might be just as accurate to look at yourself in the mirror, said Jonathan Marks, an anthropology professor at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Mark agreed there is benefit in people exploring their ancestors' origin, but DNA tests, he said, too often become an endpoint in this exploration instead of a place to start. People need to realize that genomics companies are a mix of science and corporate hucksterism, Mark said. You need to think about the difference between the product they're selling and the product you're buying. I'm in npr.org website, and it says why you should think twice about those DNA by mail results. This is from July 6, 2017, Barbara J. King. All right. The problem, Mark writes in his book, is the fabricated meaning that corporate science superimposes over the raw numbers that emerges from this process. Last week, Mark elaborated on this point in an email to me. To understand the ancestry tests, you have to begin by looking at the fine print. This type of test says, for recreational purposes only. They all say this. Did you know that? What does that mean to you? If it says for recreational purposes only, or something very similar. It obviously is written by lawyers, not scientists. And it's a way of saying that the results have no scientific or legal standing. This is privatized corporate science, not ordinary science. How do they come up with numbers? They take DNA from people from disparate regions and compare yours to theirs. The numbers reflect a measure of your DNA similarity to those of the divergent gene pool. How do they calculate it? Don't know. The algorithms are protected intellectual property. Are they accurate? About as accurate as looking in a mirror. All right, now we're in CBC News Interactive, all right, from Canada. And this is an article talking about how people are, basically getting these fraudulent tribal cards based on fraudulent DNA tests. And they got a very funny example here. And I hope you understand what's going on here and how they lie with these tests, all right? So it says here, heredity or hoax. How dog DNA helped me uncover a suspected Indian status scam. Dog DNA by Jorge Barrera and Tiffany Foxcroft. This is from June 13th, 2018, all right? When Louis Cody became suspicious of a Toronto-based laboratory that tests people's DNA to determine their ancestry, he decided to try an experiment by submitting a sample from his girlfriend's dog for analysis. All right, you hear that? According to the results, Cody shares more than a friendship with Snoopy, the Chihuahua. They share the exact same indigenous ancestry. You hear this? So him and his dog have the same ancestry, indigenous ancestry. How is that possible? It says here, I thought it was a joke, Cody said. The company is fooling people. The tests are no good. A subsequent CBC News investigation has found there are not only concerns about the accuracy of the DNA test, but also about the possible fraudulent use of cards resembling certificates of Indian status to secure tax exemptions the holders aren't entitled to. Coty from Macouche, Quebec says he first became skeptical of the results produced by DNA testing company Viagard Ocumetrics last summer while working with a group called the Confederation of Aboriginal People of Canada, CAPC. All right, it says here, for $250, CAPC will arrange the DNA test and collect the samples from prospective members. The test itself is done by ViaGuard. If the test confirms a person has at least 1% indigenous ancestry, it's another $80 for membership in the group and a CAPC card. Cody says it was his job to collect the DNA samples for CAPC, but he started to have doubts. I heard some things that were not straight with these tests, he said. So Cody says he bought 3 DNA test kits directly from ViaGuard in July last year. He took 3 different samples, which he says he sent back to company's lab. 2 of the samples contain swabs of his inner cheek. He says he labeled one with his name and the other with his father's name. For the 3rd sample, Cody says he swabbed inside Snoopy's mouth and then wrote his adopted son's name on the label. All right, so this is Snoopy. This is the Chihuahua. This is the guy the dog he tested. All right, his Chihuahua Snoopy. All right, look at the Chihuahua. He's like, I didn't do it. What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean I'm indigenous? Now it says August 26, 2017. He received 3 separate emails from ViaGuard, each containing a link to a PDF. The test results which he provided to CBC News were identical. Both Cody and Snoopy had 20% Native American ancestry. So the dog is 20% Native American ancestry, right? 12% Abenaki and 8% Mohawk. So this dog has more indigenous than a lot of all you people when you take your test. Look at that. I don't feel very good for the people who paid for these tests, Cody said. They may have paid for nothing. All right, so we're in the same website, just a little further down. And it's this person named Brabant. He was suspicious about these, DNA tests and all these people with their cards, claiming to be indigenous. They knew they weren't, right? So he did the same thing, right? He says, Brabant says he had heard about Cody's experience. So he sent in a sample of DNA from his French poodle, Molly, to the same company CAPC uses for DNA testing. All right, here's Molly, the poodle, right? It determined the dog had 5% Native American ancestry, 2% Ojibwe, 2% Saltooks, and 1% Mississauga. There has got to be something wrong there. A dog that's got indigenous heritage, Brabant said. All right, so you see what they're doing? You see they're just guessing? You see how they're just playing with you, taking your money? See how you believe everything you see on TV? Can you stop doing this? Wake up. I've been showing you in all these videos real anthropological, historical records, real history, real facts, not estimates, not these companies just trying to make money. All right, so say hello to this indigenous dog right here, Molly. All right.
When I handed Vi the certificate, she got extremely emotional about it. She wept, and it meant so very much.
People want to believe.
They want to believe they've gotten an answer.
And it's not fair of us to let them believe that we're giving them certain answers, because scientifically, we just can't.
Hank Greeley is concerned that the science isn't really there yet for you to be giving them the name of a tribe.
I think for most companies, I would be concerned too.
But what about your own company?
We have
He
the
didn't
largest...
exclude you. He included you.
But we have the largest set of sequences from Africa. And so with that, we're able to provide some level of probability in terms of frequency.
But he would say that even though you have the largest database, it's still small on the scope of things.
As I said, I share those concerns.
About yourself.
Our DNA.
And that's the rub. This business of genetic genealogy is fraught with limitations. For one thing, it can only provide information about a tiny fraction of our ancestry. Because we get half our DNA from our mothers and half from our fathers, almost all of our DNA gets shuffled and remixed every generation, making it impossible to trace what comes from whom. There are just 2 bits of DNA that remain pure: the Y chromosome, which passes directly from father to son, and something called mitochondrial DNA, which passes unchanged from mother to child. Hank Greeley, a law professor at Stanford University, has studied this new field. He worries that people don't realize just how many ancestors they actually have.
8 generations ago, both you and I had 256 great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents.
Wait, you're saying that if you go back 8 generations, we have 256 great-great-great-grandparents?
Yes, it doubles every generation. So you've got 2 parents, you have 4 grandparents, you have 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and it adds up fast. It adds up so fast, in fact, that if you go back 20 generations, you've got over 1 million grandparents.
1,048,576 to be exact. And in each generation, DNA testing can provide information about only 2 of them.
So you could be Peruvian on your mother's 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 side, Japanese on your father's 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 side, Swedish on everything else.
And you'll never know.
And you'll never know the Swedish from the Y chromosome or the mitochondrial DNA.
Now, you've looked at several of these companies that are doing these tests.
Yes.
Do you think that they explain what you just explained to us?
No, I don't think any of them does as good a job of pointing out the limitations. But, you know, businesses often don't go around telling you how weak their product is.
We don't oversell. I mean, we just say, look, we provide a service. If you're interested in exploring a tiny bit of your DNA and trace its ancestry, we can do that.
When you say it's a tiny little amount,
It's less than 0.1%.
Amount.
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 It's less than 0.1%.
and that's pretty teeny.
Yeah, but for people who know nothing about any of them, I think it's very important.
Now, I'm more confused now than I was before we started, and I have more questions than I do answers about who I am, where I'm from, and what this all means.
Look, I don't want to be a grump, and if people find this fun, okay, but do not put too much weight on it.
Yet the industry is booming, thanks to low prices, slick marketing, and our own curiosity. You can connect more deeply to the places of your past. The 5 companies in our test say they use rigorous science. They also acknowledge their ethnic breakdowns are statistical estimates. Family Tree DNA says figuring out ethnicity is not clear-cut because it's kind of a science and an art. MyHeritage says its customers understand the results are estimates.
I'm going to show you a commercial.
Out on the street, do people really know that?
Now that you've seen the advertisements and some of the promises, what do you make about what you're actually getting, what they can tell you?
There's not a shred of doubt that what they're showing you is accurate.
It's an estimate.
Really? It's not accurate?
Estimate, that's what experts tell us. You surprised?
It's like I wanted to do it.
In the year 2000, a young black geneticist named Dr. Rick Kittles, who at the time was teaching at Howard University, sent me a letter. He's now at the University of Chicago Medical School. And he said that he was asking various African-American men if they would submit themselves to this new test. And through this test, he could trace on your mother's line where in Africa you were from. Man, that was some serious stuff. And I said, yeah, I mean, I called him right away, and I said, definitely. And he said that of all the people he'd written to, nobody was writing him back. And I couldn't figure out why, but I later found out why. So I said, would you want me to come to Washington? He goes, no, I'll come up to Harvard Square. It's where I was living. So about a week later, he showed up. And now, I've had many operations. I broke my hip when I was playing football when I was about 14. It was misdiagnosed by a country doctor. So I've had a zillion operations on my leg, right? So I know about having blood extracted. If you could see my veins is, just look at a vial and blood pours out, right? I'm very easy to get my blood. Well, after half an hour, I realized that 2 things. That Dr. Rick Kittles is a brilliant geneticist, but he's not brilliant at extracting blood. I also realized why no other black male was stupid enough to let him come up to try to take their blood. Because that brother kept poking around, and I thought, damn, this Kunta Kinte stuff is hard work. How badly do I want to know where I'm from in Africa? But I really wanted to know. I'd wanted to know since I was 9 years old, so, you know, let's go for it. So finally, see, at the time, you had to extract a lot of DNA in order to run the test. Now, you just swab your cheek or spit in a test tube, depending on the company that you use. We could talk about that a little bit later. So it's very easy and it's very painless. So I waited and I waited and I waited. You know, Rick Kittles went back to Washington. I waited for the result. And I didn't hear from him. So finally, I called him. And you know how people do. He picked up the phone after I called him about 1 million times. He goes, "Oh, man, I was just about to return your phone call." I said, "Rick, what's up, man? Where am I from? In Africa. Where are my people? You know, I want to jump on a plane and go. I thought I'd buy some land, you know, get a fine little African sister, you know, to hook up." I was single at the time, don't get me wrong. I'm still single. Well, so he said, "Well, we had to run, your results were anomalous, and we had to run them many times. But we finally have figured out where you're from. You are descended on your mother's side from the Nubian people." Now, all African Americans, not all African Americans, but many African Americans want to be descended from one or two ethnic groups. Either the Zulu, because the Chaka Zulu, and the Zulu kicked the English in the behind in the Boer Wars, right? Until they finally were overcome. But you want to be Zulu, or you want to be Nubian. Who were the Nubians? The Nubians were the black pharaohs, right? The Nubians are in the Bible. The 25th dynasty was the Nubian dynasty. In Egyptian art, they always hated the Nubians. Nubians are always represented as darker. You know, they were warring kingdoms. And Nubia ran from what today's Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, up to the Aswan Dam, the second cataract in the Nile River. And so a Nubian, and all these people wanted to be Nubians, descended from the black pharaohs. So my friend Molefi Asante, you know, the founder of Afrocentricity, we argued a lot in public, but we're very good friends privately. I joke, every time he attacks me, I get a raise at Harvard, so it's cool. So I attack him, you know. We do what Malcolm and Martin couldn't do, you know. Set it up, and then we go split the money and slap five and go to Sylvia's, have fried chicken. Believe me, that's a much better way to function than hating each other. So I called Molefi first thing. I said, "Molefi, I just got my results back. I am a Nubian. Where are you from?" "I am the true African prince." My friend Anthony Appiah, whose uncle was the Asantehene, the king of the Asante people. When Rick Kittle sent me a certificate announcing I was Nubian, Anthony Appiah looked at it and said, "What a ton of rubbish." Now, why would he say that? Well, there's a slight problem with being either Zulu or Nubian if you're African American. You know what the problem is? None of our ancestors who came here in slavery came from South Africa, the Zulu people, or from Nubia. None, zero. Egypt is over here. The slaves came from the area from Senegal down to Angola. 97% of the slaves came from that region, all right? So, you know how long it would take it to walk from Sudan to Senegal or to Angola? It just didn't happen. So I looked at Anthony and I said, "You're just jealous." Because I am a Nubian prince. I didn't care. I had it framed. I put it up in my living room so everybody could see that I was from royalty. So I didn't think about it. I thought maybe it was strange. Maybe it was on a trade route. You know, there were great Muslim trade routes. You know, today, this is important for the students. In my time, we were taught that the Africans were these benighted people, and they were too stupid to build a boat or to be curious about the world and cross the Sahara Desert. It was rubbish. Africans were just as curious as anybody else. The Sahara Desert was a highway. It wasn't a barrier. So I thought, well, and there were great trade routes. So I thought maybe my Nubian descendant had come over and ended up being tricked by some white man and ended up in Maryland or Virginia or something. So that was cool. And if I needed an interpretation, believe me, I could have produced one. So, and by the way, you know, the Zulu thing, when Oprah was finally in the first series, and we gave her DNA test, basically the next day she went to South Africa to announce that she was opening what became the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy. She was in an auditorium like 75,000 people or something, and she announced that she just had the test and that she was Zulu. So it broke on CNN. I was sitting in my living room minding my own business and said, Oprah Winfrey's a Zulu. So I called Rick Kittles. And I said, Rick, did you tell Oprah she was a Zulu? He goes, no, man, she made that up herself. It's a true story. It's a true story. I would lie to make you laugh, but I'm telling you a true story. So I said, Rick, are you in your lab? He said, yeah. I said, is anybody there? He said, no. I said, when the results come in, make her Zulu, man. You know? I said, you back there making it up anyway. Nobody believe you can take some spit and figure out a tribe? What, are you crazy? Nobody believe you can take some spit and figure out a tribe? What, are you crazy? Nobody believe you can take some spit and figure out a tribe? What, are you crazy?
Brother Washington, your mitochondrial DNA is quite common among the Mende and Temne people in Sierra Leone. Yeah!
Where do that for? Where do that for? Do that for? Yo, come here. Yo, that. Yo, come here. Yo, that. Yo, that. Yo, that. Yo, that. Oh, goodness. Yo. Yo. That is. Yo, I'm done. Yo, I'm done. Come on. Come on. Come on. I never even do that.